Introduction: Why Linux matters. For decades, Linux has been the operating system of choice for developers, hobbyists, system administrators, and privacy enthusiasts. It powers everything from smartphones to supercomputers, servers, and embedded devices. Android, which runs on billions of smartphones worldwide, is actually based on Linux. Yet for the everyday desktop user, Linux remains largely mysterious, often perceived as a niche tool reserved for hackers and programmers who speak in cryptic command lines and technical jargon. This perception, however, is far from today's reality. Linux has evolved into a remarkably beginner-friendly ecosystem with polished interfaces, intuitive installers, and thriving communities ready to help newcomers. You don't need a computer science degree or years of programming experience to use Linux effectively. What you need is simply to pick the right distribution, or distro, which is the specific flavor of Linux that best suits your needs and comfort level. The world of Linux offers something unique that proprietary operating systems cannot: genuine choice. Unlike Windows or macOS, which lock you into a single interface and workflow, Linux presents hundreds of different approaches to computing. Some distributions focus on absolute simplicity for beginners, others prioritize endless customization possibilities, while still others emphasize performance, security, or privacy. This variety means that somewhere in the Linux ecosystem, there's an operating system perfectly tailored to your specific needs and preferences. Understanding what makes Linux different from traditional operating systems is the first step in appreciating its potential. Unlike Windows or macOS, Linux is open source, meaning anyone can view, modify, and share its source code. This openness has fostered a global community of developers and users who contribute to making Linux better every day. Instead of one monolithic version controlled by a single corporation, Linux comes in hundreds of distributions, each tailored to different types of users and use cases. Understanding the Linux landscape. The fundamental difference between Linux and other operating systems lies in how software is managed and installed. Rather than downloading programs from various websites and running potentially dangerous installers, Linux uses centralized package managers that handle software installation, updates, and removal safely and efficiently. Popular package managers include apt used by Debian and Ubuntu systems, DNF utilized by Fedora, and Pacman found in Arch-based distributions like Manjaro. This centralized approach not only enhances security but also makes managing your software incredibly straightforward once you understand the basics. Another key distinction is Linux's approach to desktop environments. While Windows and macOS lock you into their predetermined interfaces, Linux separates the underlying system from the graphical interface you see and interact with. This means you can choose from dozens of desktop environments, each offering different aesthetics, features, and workflows. GNOME provides a modern, gesture-driven interface similar to a smartphone or tablet. KDE Plasma offers extensive customization options and a more traditional desktop paradigm. Cinnamon delivers a familiar Windows-like experience, while XFCE focuses on lightweight performance for older hardware. This flexibility means you can find an interface that matches your preferences and workflow rather than adapting to what a company thinks you should use. Community support represents another significant advantage of the Linux ecosystem. Rather than relying on expensive corporate support contracts, Linux thrives on forums, wikis, documentation sites, and community chat groups. If you encounter a problem, chances are excellent that someone has faced the same issue and documented the solution. This collaborative approach to problem-solving creates a vast knowledge base that grows continuously, often providing more comprehensive and accessible help than traditional corporate support channels. Privacy and freedom form the philosophical foundation of Linux development. Unlike commercial operating systems that may track your usage, collect personal data, or push unwanted updates, Linux distributions typically respect user privacy by default. Many distributions are built specifically with privacy and security in mind, offering features like built-in encryption, anonymous browsing tools, and transparent policies about data collection. This commitment to user freedom extends beyond privacy to include the fundamental right to control your own computing experience. Essential Linux terminology. Before diving into specific distributions, understanding key Linux terminology will help you navigate discussions and documentation more effectively. A distribution, or distro, refers to a complete operating system package that includes the Linux kernel, a desktop environment, essential applications, and utilities all bundled together. Think of it as a carefully curated collection of software that works well together, similar to how you might purchase a pre-built computer rather than assembling individual components. The kernel represents the core of any operating system, managing hardware resources, processing tasks, and facilitating communication between software and hardware components. While all Linux distributions share the same basic kernel, they differ in how they configure it and what additional software they include. Understanding this helps explain why different distributions can feel quite different despite running the same fundamental operating system. Desktop environments deserve special attention because they dramatically influence your daily computing experience. Unlike Windows, where the interface is inseparable from the operating system, Linux treats the desktop environment as a separate component you can change or customize. GNOME emphasizes simplicity and modern design principles. KDE Plasma provides extensive customization options and features. Cinnamon offers familiarity for Windows users, while XFCE prioritizes performance and resource efficiency. This separation of concerns means you can experiment with different interfaces until you find one that feels natural and productive. A live USB represents one of Linux's most useful features for beginners. This refers to a USB drive that contains a complete, bootable Linux system you can run without installing anything on your hard drive. Live USBs allow you to test drive Linux distributions, recover data from corrupted systems, or carry your complete computing environment with you. Creating and using live USBs is straightforward and provides the safest way to explore Linux without any commitment or risk to your existing system. Long-term support, commonly abbreviated as LTS, designates releases that receive security updates and bug fixes for extended periods, typically 3 to 5 years. LTS releases prioritize stability over cutting-edge features, making them ideal for beginners who want a reliable system that won't require frequent major updates. Non-LTS releases offer newer features and software versions but require more frequent upgrades to maintain security and support. Choosing your first Linux distribution. Selecting your first Linux distribution can feel overwhelming given the hundreds of available options, but focusing on beginner-friendly choices narrows the field considerably. Each distribution has its own philosophy, target audience, and strengths, so understanding these differences helps you make an informed decision based on your needs and background. Ubuntu stands as the gold standard for Linux beginners and has earned this reputation through years of focusing on user-friendliness and accessibility. Developed by Canonical, Ubuntu boasts one of the largest and most active communities in the Linux world, which translates to extensive documentation, tutorials, and forum support. The distribution ships with GNOME desktop environment by default, providing a clean, modern interface that feels intuitive to users familiar with smartphones and tablets. Ubuntu's Software Center makes finding and installing applications as simple as browsing an app store, while its installer guides you through setup with clear explanations and sensible defaults. Long-term support versions receive updates for 5 years, providing stability and security without forcing frequent upgrades. This combination of community support, polish, and stability makes Ubuntu an excellent choice for anyone new to Linux who wants a safe, reliable environment to learn in. Linux Mint builds upon Ubuntu's foundation but takes a different approach to the desktop experience, making it particularly appealing to users transitioning from Windows. Mint's developers recognize that many Linux newcomers come from Windows backgrounds, so they've crafted the Cinnamon desktop environment to provide familiar concepts like a taskbar, start menu, and system tray in logical locations. This familiarity reduces the learning curve significantly, allowing you to focus on understanding Linux concepts rather than relearning basic navigation. Mint also comes pre-configured with multimedia codecs and proprietary drivers, meaning DVDs, music files, and video content work immediately without additional configuration. The distribution maintains Ubuntu's excellent hardware compatibility while providing a more traditional desktop experience that feels comfortable and productive from day one. Zorin OS markets itself explicitly as a Windows and macOS replacement, and its developers have invested considerable effort in creating an experience that minimizes culture shock for users switching from other operating systems. The distribution includes the Zorin Appearance application, which allows you to adjust the desktop layout to mimic Windows, macOS, or traditional Linux interfaces with just a few clicks. This flexibility helps ease the transition while gradually introducing Linux concepts and workflows. Zorin OS also emphasizes visual polish and attention to detail, creating an operating system that feels modern and professional rather than rough around the edges. The distribution runs efficiently on both new and older hardware, making it versatile for various computing scenarios. Pop_OS, developed by computer manufacturer System 76, represents a more modern approach to Linux designed for creators, gamers, and power users who still want beginner-friendly operation. The distribution builds on Ubuntu's foundation but adds significant enhancements for productivity and performance. Pop_OS includes automatic window tiling features that help you organize multiple applications efficiently, making it excellent for multitasking workflows. The distribution also provides outstanding gaming support with NVIDIA drivers pre-installed and optimized, while maintaining a clean, distraction-free interface that lets you focus on your work or play. Pop_OS appeals to users who want something more sophisticated than basic distributions but aren't ready to dive into highly technical systems. Fedora Workstation offers a different philosophy, serving as a showcase for the latest Linux technologies while remaining surprisingly accessible to beginners. Sponsored by Red Hat, one of the largest enterprise Linux companies, Fedora emphasizes cutting-edge features and adherence to open-source principles. The distribution ships with GNOME desktop environment and focuses on providing the most current versions of software and kernel features. While this means occasional rough edges as new technologies mature, it also means access to the latest capabilities and improvements. Fedora suits beginners who enjoy learning about technology and don't mind troubleshooting occasional issues in exchange for staying at the forefront of Linux development. Elementary OS takes inspiration from macOS, emphasizing simplicity, elegance, and thoughtful design throughout the user experience. The distribution features the custom Pantheon desktop environment, which provides a clean, minimalist interface focused on productivity and beauty. Elementary OS includes its own app store curated specifically for the platform, ensuring applications integrate well with the overall design philosophy. The distribution appeals particularly to users coming from macOS who appreciate attention to visual detail and consistent design language. Elementary OS proves that Linux can be every bit as polished and user-friendly as commercial operating systems while maintaining the openness and freedom that defines the Linux ecosystem. Manjaro brings the power and flexibility of Arch Linux to regular users through a beginner-friendly installer and sensible default configurations. Arch Linux itself has a reputation for being highly customizable but intimidating for newcomers due to its manual installation process and minimal hand-holding. Manjaro solves this problem by providing easy installation while maintaining access to Arch's extensive software repositories, including the famous Arch user repository that contains thousands of community-contributed applications. The distribution follows a rolling release model, meaning you receive continuous updates rather than major version upgrades, keeping your system current without disruptive reinstallations. Manjaro offers multiple desktop environment options including XFCE, KDE, and GNOME, allowing you to choose the interface that best suits your preferences. Exploring Linux safely. One of Linux's greatest advantages for beginners is the ability to explore and experiment without risk to your existing system or data. Several approaches allow you to test Linux distributions thoroughly before making any commitment to installation or configuration changes. Live USB drives provide the safest and most convenient way to experience Linux distributions firsthand. Creating a live USB involves downloading a distribution's installation image and writing it to a USB drive using tools like Rufus on Windows or built-in utilities on macOS and Linux. Once created, you can boot your computer from the USB drive to run a complete Linux system without touching your hard drive. Live sessions typically run slower than installed systems due to USB speed limitations, but they provide an authentic experience of the interface, applications, and general workflow. Most distributions allow you to test hardware compatibility, connect to wireless networks, browse the internet, and run applications during live sessions, giving you a comprehensive preview of what to expect from a full installation. Virtual machines offer another excellent approach for Linux exploration, particularly if you want to run multiple distributions simultaneously or maintain easy access to your primary operating system. Virtualization software like VirtualBox, VMware, or the built-in Hyper-V on Windows creates isolated environments where you can install and run Linux without affecting your main system. Virtual machines provide full installation experiences rather than the read-only nature of live USBs, allowing you to save files, install additional software, and customize settings to your heart's content. The main limitations involve performance overhead and resource sharing with your host operating system, but modern computers typically have sufficient power to run virtual machines smoothly for evaluation purposes. Dual booting represents a more permanent approach that involves installing Linux alongside your existing operating system, allowing you to choose which system to boot at startup. This configuration provides full performance from both operating systems while maintaining access to your familiar environment during the learning process. However, dual booting requires more careful planning and carries slightly higher risk since it involves modifying your hard drive's partition structure. Most modern Linux installers can set up dual boot configurations automatically, but understanding backup procedures and having recovery media available provides important safety nets. Practical tips for Linux success. Starting your Linux journey successfully involves developing good habits and realistic expectations from the beginning. The most important advice for beginners is to start with user-friendly distributions rather than jumping immediately into advanced systems. Ubuntu, Linux Mint, or Zorin OS provide excellent learning environments that won't overwhelm you with complexity while you're absorbing fundamental concepts. Once you're comfortable with basic Linux operation, you can always explore more specialized distributions that match your evolving interests and needs. Learning the terminal or command line interface represents an important milestone in Linux proficiency, but it doesn't need to happen immediately. Many modern Linux distributions provide graphical tools for most common tasks, allowing you to accomplish your daily computing without touching the command line. However, gradually learning terminal basics like navigating directories, updating software, and managing files will significantly expand your capabilities and understanding. Start with simple commands like sudo apt update for updating software or ls for listing directory contents, building your knowledge incrementally rather than trying to master everything at once. Community resources form the backbone of Linux support, and learning to use them effectively accelerates your learning process considerably. Ubuntu forums, Stack Overflow, Reddit's Linux for Noobs, and distribution-specific communities provide vast repositories of solutions, tutorials, and advice. When encountering problems, searching these resources often yields immediate answers since Linux's long history means most issues have been encountered and solved before. Don't hesitate to ask questions in these communities, but remember to provide specific details about your system, the problem you're experiencing, and any error messages you've encountered. Experimentation and breaking things occasionally is not only normal but beneficial for learning Linux deeply. Unlike proprietary systems where modifications can void warranties or create expensive recovery scenarios, Linux encourages tinkering and customization. If you break something through experimentation, you can usually fix it through the same community resources that helped you modify it in the first place. In worst-case scenarios, reinstalling Linux takes much less time than reinstalling Windows or macOS, and most distributions allow you to preserve your personal files during reinstallation. Desktop environment exploration helps you discover interfaces and workflows that maximize your productivity and satisfaction. Don't assume the default desktop environment is your only option. Most distributions allow you to install and switch between multiple environments easily. Trying KDE Plasma, Cinnamon, XFCE, or other environments helps you understand Linux's flexibility while finding the interface that feels most natural for your working style. Overcoming common challenges. New Linux users often encounter predictable challenges that can feel frustrating but have straightforward solutions once you understand the underlying causes and approaches. Hardware compatibility, particularly wireless network adapters, represents the most common initial hurdle for Linux beginners. Unlike Windows, which includes vast driver databases, Linux relies primarily on open-source drivers built into the kernel or available through distribution repositories. If your wireless adapter doesn't work immediately, connecting via Ethernet cable allows you to access package managers and install any necessary proprietary drivers. Most modern hardware works excellently with Linux, but having an Ethernet cable available during initial setup prevents connectivity issues from becoming barriers to progress. Software installation confusion often arises because Linux handles applications differently than Windows or macOS. Rather than downloading installers from various websites, Linux uses centralized package managers that provide software from trusted repositories. This approach enhances security and ensures compatibility, but it requires learning new procedures for finding and installing applications. Most distributions provide graphical software centers that work like app stores, making software discovery and installation straightforward once you understand the concept. Additionally, newer universal packaging formats like Flatpak and Snap provide access to applications that might not be available in your distribution's default repositories. System updates in Linux work differently than other operating systems, often causing confusion for new users. Unlike Windows, which forces updates at inconvenient times, or macOS, which bundles system and application updates together, Linux provides granular control over when and what to update. Updates are generally safer and faster than other systems since they rarely require reboots and usually don't change fundamental system behavior. Running updates frequently, such as weekly or whenever prompted, keeps your system secure and stable while avoiding the accumulation of changes that might cause complications. Gaming concerns often prevent potential Linux users from making the switch, but the landscape has improved dramatically in recent years. Valve's Steam Deck runs Linux natively and has invested heavily in making Windows games playable on Linux through the Proton compatibility layer. Thousands of Windows games now run excellently on Linux, often with performance matching or exceeding Windows. Native Linux games continue to increase, and major game engines now support Linux development. While gaming on Linux requires some additional consideration compared to Windows, it's no longer the significant barrier it once represented. The future of Linux for beginners. As we move through 2025, Linux continues becoming more accessible and mainstream with each passing year. Valve's Steam Deck has introduced millions of users to Linux gaming, demonstrating that Linux can provide excellent gaming experiences without compromise. Enterprise adoption continues growing as companies recognize Linux's security, stability, and cost advantages, leading to improved hardware support and software development for the platform. Privacy movements worldwide are driving more users toward open-source alternatives to commercial operating systems that collect personal data and limit user control. Linux distributions built specifically for privacy and security provide options for users concerned about surveillance, data collection, and digital rights. This trend toward privacy consciousness makes Linux increasingly relevant for mainstream users rather than just technical enthusiasts. Educational institutions are adopting Linux more broadly, recognizing its value for teaching computer science concepts and providing students with powerful, free tools for learning and development. This educational adoption creates a new generation of users comfortable with Linux concepts and interfaces from early in their computing education. Conclusion: getting started with Linux doesn't require technical expertise or years of preparation. The modern Linux ecosystem provides welcoming, user-friendly distributions that rival or exceed commercial operating systems in ease of use, stability, and functionality. Whether you choose Ubuntu's proven reliability, Linux Mint's familiar interface, Elementary OS's elegant design, or Manjaro's cutting-edge features, you'll find a distribution perfectly suited to your needs and preferences. The best advice for beginning your Linux journey is simply to start. Download a live USB of a distribution that appeals to you and spend an afternoon exploring its capabilities. You might discover that Linux isn't just a free alternative to Windows or macOS, but represents a fundamentally different approach to computing that prioritizes user freedom, privacy, and choice over corporate interests and profit margins. Linux offers something unique in today's computing landscape: an operating system built by users, for users, without hidden agendas or profit motives driving design decisions. As you explore Linux, you're not just learning a new operating system, you're joining a global community committed to open-source principles, collaborative development, and the belief that users should control their own computing experiences. This philosophy creates software that respects your privacy, doesn't obsolete your hardware artificially, and grows more capable through community contribution rather than corporate mandate. The transition to Linux represents more than changing operating systems. It represents reclaiming ownership of your digital life and joining millions of users worldwide who have chosen freedom, privacy, and community over convenience and corporate control. Your Linux journey begins with a single download and a willingness to explore something different. Take that first step today, and discover what computing can be when it's designed for you rather than against you.